Michael with United Veterans Worldwide, excited today to meet with my friend John, who is an Army veteran who's had a wonderful career and continues today to do some amazing work on behalf of Afghans and other refugees. And I want to introduce this global audience today to John. John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
First, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity to kind of speak. I think there's a lot of stories to be told about veterans, and especially now that we're in older age, the OAF, OEF veterans. Dare I say it, that we're getting a little bit older.
I know it. Let me look at this, yeah.
You know, right? We got gray hair. I'm 45. But let me tell you the quick story about how I joined the Army. So I was a young kid growing up in Lowell, Massachusetts. It was a mill town, not a lot of stability. Didn't come up with much of anything. And I remember being in high school and a recruiter walked into, this is the Greens, 1996. He walked into the cafeteria of the high school and said, hey, I want people to join the Army, right? But what I remember about him is when he walked in, people had respect for him, right? Like people looked at him. The girls all thought he was hot. Like everything about his presence was like the person I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of it because I was young, wanted to be accepted by my friends, and you're always trying to find a way to fit in. And so I joined. I signed up. My mom had to sign for me the whole thing. And I actually became a full-time, I ended up becoming a career reservist. But I joined the Army Reserves. I went to basic training when I was a junior in high school. Came back to high school, which was a wild experience too. And then continued my high school and then finished out my AIT. But yeah, that turned into that kind of like real sudden thought. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I have people in the military. For me, it was like a way to be accepted by my peers and people around me. So, but then I ended up doing 23 years. So, my first part of my career, Private Moses definitely was an E4 several times. But eventually I stuck it out, and after 9/11, I ended up changing my MOS. I got a better role. I started accepting more responsibility because I understood what was at stake. I think prior to 9/11, we really didn't. I mean, we did our work, but
it wasn't the same.
It wasn't the same. And so based off a lot of those mistakes, I went up to E5, started deploying. I ended up deploying 3 times. I spent 2 years in Kuwait, which was, it's Kuwait. Yeah. So it was hot. But I was fortunate. I learned a lot. Like, it may have been kind of a rear echelon type of role, but we loaded ships for the first tour, right? We were loading for the big surge in Iraq, and it was just ships coming every day. So long and short of it, though, I finished my last tour in Afghanistan. I was at E7 when I got there, a newly promoted E7. And my battalion actually picked me up for embassy. So I'd done good work. I'd been in the same unit for a long time. So I'd done good work, I thought, in Kuwait. And when the time came to go to Afghanistan, they said, hey, we need somebody that's mature enough that can handle the political side of things on an embassy. And honestly, there's a lot of freedom on an embassy. So, but my battalion commander selected me out of that. And I went to Afghanistan, and it changed my life, but it was all really good stuff. I'm grateful for most of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good highlight. A couple of things that stand out to me, John. Number one, you mentioned that you're a career reservist, and I have utmost respect for reservists. I served among some of them as an AGR guy for a couple of years, and I had a lot of respect for guys who could do a full-time job in the civilian sector and then drop it. Undertrained in a lot of ways, under-resourced, and still be expected to do the same mission that an active duty unit that's full-time 7 days a week, out in the field doing all that stuff. It's an incredible sacrifice and an incredible benefit. And one of the first surprises I got going to Iraq was how much reserve units were utilized and were necessary to give reprieve to active duty units who were deploying for 18 months and needed a unit to come in and replace them and give them a reprieve so they can go back a year later. And those reserve units filled in that gap and performed that mission admirably. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a ton of respect for active duty reserves, all of them. I think as a reservist, we have a unique perspective, right? So I was in a transportation battalion. So we knew we were deploying every 3 years. Like you came into the unit, you deployed, then you came back, you reset. I think it's rest, reset, and then you would deploy, right? Yep. So the interesting thing about being a reservist, though, again, is I had a civilian career. So I was in like an entry-level sales position. I was doing work, doing the normal 20-something-year-old thing when I first started deploying. But what it gave me is when I was on these posts, there was always opportunities to do, because there was downtime. Every tour, there is some downtime on every base. Yep. In some places, you have more access. So like when I was in Kuwait, I had access to education. So I would work on professional certifications and stuff. And when I was home, I was still working on my reserve stuff. And a lot of these people are incredibly experienced.
Yes.
Right? I have friends that in transportation that are 5-tour veterans. So they bring a lot. And one of the things I think is really unique about Reserve Guard units is they also bring a different set of skills. So a lot of active duty units are really set on, this is our mission, this is how we do it, this is our MTO, like whatever all the things that come with the structure.
Yeah.
Reservists, you'd be like, oh, my electricity isn't working. And you're like, your neighbor would be like, I'm a master electrician. Like, right? And they have a whole different career. So I was really grateful to be in the reserves. I was grateful to deploy as much as I could. I think the op tempo was hard for a long time on reservists too. And
it was.
it was really hard. They were everywhere. Guards people, they were all over the place. It was a lot of fun. I don't know about fun. I liked it. I'm looking back wistfully on it now.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Right. You know, the second piece I wanted to mention, John, is that on this channel, there's no one-ups. I don't care if a guy was a reservist for 2 years. I interview everybody who's sworn their allegiance to this country and be willing to deploy and do other things. And I don't care if it's a Navy SEAL or if it's a transpo. I don't care if it's an HR person working behind the desk in S1. That's not the message. The message here is that there's been so much effort done globally from veterans in all fields that supports the mission, and Kuwait is no exception. If it wasn't for people being ready in Kuwait to receive us on our incoming to go to Iraq, we would never have been ready, equipped, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, well, that's incredible. Yeah, that's incredible. So tell me some of your biggest highlights in the service, and maybe even a couple low moments.
Yeah, I'll tell you some of the. I actually know. I think about this stuff a lot. My war is kind of it's not in the rear view, but it technically is in the rear view. I always have this great memory of when I joined the Army. My great grandfather had been in the Army. He was in World War II. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, had a Purple Heart, and those things are big, right? So my grandmother was, when I joined, like I said, I didn't have a lot of options. I wasn't going to college. I wasn't doing these things, but I very remember distinctly is that when I left for basic training for the taxi cab to go to Boston, that my grandfather and my Nana were on the back steps, watched me get in the cab, hand this little slip of paper to a cab driver, and they're both gone, right? And I remember that moment. Some of the biggest highlights during the service was I loved being a senior enlisted. I love being enlisted the whole time. And my thing was I learned early on from somebody to give credit, take blame. And I witnessed it, right? And that's how, a lot of good officers and people that pick up good habits, they see somebody else do it. I loved promoting my soldiers. I loved when when I was in E6, bringing somebody in E5 that really worked their ass off. I don't know if that's okay.
Yeah.
But, so work their ass off, and they're reliable, and they're doing the work, and you're like, hey, I want you to be promoted, right? And then when I got to E7, it was the same thing. And we would go on missions, and, some people hoarded awards like they were paying for them, right? And I would always I would tell my NCOs, right, you're going to go out and you're going to look for people that are excelling. It doesn't matter if it's life-changing. The fact that they're putting effort in, if you reward that effort, they're always going to do it, right?
Yep, true.
And so I loved seeing my people get promoted. I loved giving them praise when it was needed. I loved getting in front of them when the commander would get salty, and I'd be like, absolutely not, these are my people. Loved all that stuff. One of my highlights was in Afghanistan when I got my E7, when I got promoted in October 2011. I was in Afghanistan with my unit. People came from all over the country. It was this huge crowd of people to see somebody that they had kind of come up. And that's the thing I miss the most probably is the people. But what about lowlights, though? So those are some of the highlights. I think overall, I've looked back at my, when I retired, I wrote a letter and I said, I believe that the Army and I have given and taken away of each other in equal measure. And that's kind of how I left it. I don't think you can do any better than that.
Yeah, very cool.
I think the lowlights, we lost some friends. We lost, for stupid, none of it's stupid, but you go to a country and you're trying to change the world, and then losing a friend in a helicopter accident, or losing 4 friends to drunk driving, a gunshot head, suicide. Another guy overdosed on pill. I think it was Sergeant Major that overdosed. He was in E7 when I was in E6, and we came up kind of together, and he had his shit together. And that guy came home, and a few years later, we all had to go to his funeral, right? So I think those are the downsides, right? I think the way the war ended in Afghanistan has been really hard on a lot of people.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk a little bit about that. But Overall, I got to say it was, leaving my daughter for a year was tough. I volunteered for Afghanistan. I could have stayed because I had done enough tours, and I was like, absolutely not. I'm going. But my daughter was home for that. But all in all, it's mostly positive. At the end of it all, maybe I'm looking at it with rose-colored glasses because I'm in a different position now. But I really look back and don't regret very much at all.
Yeah.
Even the getting promoted parts. Even when I got knocked down a couple times. I had this E8, Master Sergeant Dixon, that was a private or a specialist, and I screwed him over, right? And now I know this stuff, right? But I screwed him over, and he said to me, he pulled me in the office, he said, I'm not going to just knock you down, the commander, whatever. He said, but that's not how we do things in the Army, right? That's not how I'm going to do things. So he knocked me down, and he said, you have to go mop the drill hall today. And we went into the drill hall, and who was sitting in there? Master Sergeant Dixon. And he watched me and talked to me the whole time and talked to me about what was expected and all this stuff. And at the end, he said, I had to be here because I gave the punishment. And I want you to remember that. If I'm giving you the punishment, I'm here to serve it with you, right? So, and I learned a lot from that. And I still remember that.
It's powerful.
Yeah, it's really powerful from an old, crusty E8 that was just awesome.
Yeah, you mentioned some key things here. One is the loss of life to stupid things, and I would concur with that word. I go to combat with people, and then we come home and somebody dies in a car accident or a motorcycle accident. And you're just like, we survived so much together. How does this happen? And it happens everywhere. I remember watching the movie Band of Brothers, the series on HBO, and at the very end of the conflict, after Germany and Japan have surrendered and they're trying to do reconstruction, reconciliation. Yeah, some accidents happen and guys who have survived D-Day on die, and it's like, yeah, how does this happen?
The hardest part for us too is back then, there wasn't its mental health push, right? They understood the concepts of PTSD and all this stuff. Yeah. And now at least we have some support on it. But even with that, amazing amount of support. And I was in a really supportive unit that we encourage people to go. But the thing is it wasn't, we still have this suicide problem. How hard is that to that Sergeant Major I'm talking about was a role model. He was the most incredibly fit, spot on guy, didn't hurt people. He was there to do the job and make sure you were doing better at your job. And then see that guy come home and he was so loved. Hundreds of people show up. Same thing with the kid though. I had an E5 that, committed suicide when he got home. Hundreds of people showed up, and it was all people from his unit. And it was people flew from all over the country to say goodbye. Yeah. And I just think that part of the legacy of Afghanistan, it's really uncomfortable. But, over 20-something years, this is what happens. And I think we can do better with our generation than the previous generation did with Vietnam, for sure.
Yeah. One of the sad things about the symptoms that lead people down that road to suicide, and I was on that road myself several years ago, despite feeling so grounded and feeling like my career was really good, when that darkness comes from suppressed trauma, right? This cloud comes over, and the last thing people want to do is reach out. So I reached out to a buddy of mine. I've interviewed him on the channel here, and he's still going through some hell of his own mentally. And I said, hey, how you doing? He's like, not good. And I was like, bro, why don't you call me? And he's like, hey, dude, I'll be honest. I don't want to call.
It's just not here.
It's not.
That urge will reach out. Yeah.
It's not. And I just said, well, then here's my deal for you is every time I think about you and I wonder how you're doing, I'm going to pick up the phone and call. Be like, hey, where are you at right now? What are you doing right now? And if that's the only way we can help, preserve our fellow veterans and first responders who are struggling, then that's what we got to do. I'm glad you highlighted that piece because it's such an important message to send to the global audience. One of the reasons I started this global channel is because the resources and benefits that we have in the United States and Canada and some other European countries aren't the same in other countries that have veterans, right? Africa, etc., Middle East, and they spin with zero help, and we don't know what that suicide rate looks like, but nobody's tracking those guys. And that's the message I want to put out to this global audience is that there's always hope, there's always help. You're never alone. If you feel that way, don't feel like it's just you and that you're broken, because you're not broken, you're ill, and there's a way to get healthy again after ill. So
Absolutely. And I'll briefly tell you my story about how I reached out for help, because I think this is a good topic, because I've lost a lot of friends like this. There was a point after the evacuation of Afghanistan where it really had bottomed out. There was a moral injury to it.
Yep.
The evacuation was just really difficult, right? And so after the evacuation, the 2 weeks end, and the gates closed in Kabul, and I remember that November 11th, Veterans Day. I remember I did a lot of, this is odd, I did a lot of work in my shed because it was outside and wake my family up, because a lot of the work in evac was at night. And that night, I went into my shed, and I remember being abjectly alone. I did try to reach out to people. Nobody was around that day. I couldn't find people. And I remember in my shed, it's 20 feet away, maybe 30. And I remember like bottoming out in that shed, like swallowing this incredibly bad grief. And finally, someone I barely knew, who's now a great friend of mine, I just was like, can you call me? And they were like, and they're a person that hates phone calls, and they did it anyway. And they stayed on the phone with me for quite a while. And what I ended up doing for help, they got me to the computer, and I ended up in Massachusetts, and there's other worlds like this. There's a place called Homebase, homebase.org.
I know it well.
And, 100% free care. And so I got into an emergency session, then they got me into regular CBT, and then they got me into all this antidepressants. And so I'm much more stable now, but I very distinctly remember that like overwhelming aloneness and like not being able to find a way out. And and eventually it's just like you hit the bottom and you're like, well, whatever. And I got to tell you, like for Homebase, I reached out to them and they called me the next day, and they were like, yep, you got it. And they gave me like a month of emergency, and I'm still in their program. I do group with them, and I do other therapy with them still as well.
Good for you, John. I'm so glad you recognized that program, because Homebase was critical to my healing in PTSD. And I say healing because I'm not talking about curing. The difference between curing and healing. Curing is, I'm going to return you to the state you were prior to this moral, physical, emotional injury. And healing is, we're going to take your moral, physical, emotional injury, and we're going to create a new version of you that can move forward and use tools to become healthy and strong. And
you got to work within the scope of who you are.
Yes,
right?
And it's a new you.
I'm a different person now. Right?
Yes.
I'm not who I was. Right. And that stuff changes you forever. And I think, there's a lot of misconceptions about PTSD, even with friends and family, right? One of the things is PTSD is physiological. It's not just, your mental status. It's your dog brain is literally overtaking the smartest part of you and saying, this is how I know how to react to things. And so, that shows itself in many ways. Like, I remember coming home and then especially like just being angry at things something wouldn't go my way, and I'd be like, everything was an emergency. I bought this house that I'm in like a week because I got home from Afghanistan and had like a really weird mission, and I came home, I was like, we're buying a house, and my wife was like, and then we owned a house, like, and the house has worked out great, but like, it's like I didn't, it can do damage, and it's hard when your dad is running around like, oh, my son will be like, can you fix this broom? And I'm like, fix the broom, and then run off. So I just think there's a lot out there, and I think the 20-something years we were in, it's the longest war. Yeah. And I think for a long time we heard people say, support the troops, right? Put the bumper sticker on, buy them a coffee, Dunkin' Donuts, all that stuff. And now's really the time they need it. So we needed chapstick and all the great things people mailed us when we were there. Yeah. So much chapstick. But really what we need for support now is legislation and continued work in volunteers and communities to say, okay, this is our generation of veterans, it's our turn. So that's what I'm looking for.
And we may need a very different version of what maybe other wars needed. Yeah.
It's a different war. And I think one of the things that was really spectacular, I thought, like during the evacuation of Afghanistan, was how many people came out of the woodwork. So there were retired military people, there were active duty military, they were retired diplos and active duty. Everybody came together in an immediacy, went directly into deployment work, right? Like set up a talk, the whole thing, right? And worked on behalf of people they loved. And there's not, the Vietnamese were able to have that kind of relationship. But for us, I hear this a lot, like Afghans are really unique and special. They're a lot like the Kurds, where they're endearing, they're loyal, and if you do for them, they'll do for you. And like, you don't get that kind of loyalty from even a lot of Americans, right?
Right.
And so, and I think people were just in love with them, and to see all those people come together was really unique, and I'm happy for that. Could we have served our friends better? Absolutely, because we're in a real, we know what's happened and how many people have come out. And we also know how many people still remain in Afghanistan that we owe our promises to. So, that's all.
I hope the new administration takes a look at that and goes back to the promises and is able to help keep some of that again.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I don't want to talk too much about the politics. I think one of the things that I've had a really hard time with as an Afghanistan veteran is the closure piece, right? How do you have closure on a war when you haven't really been acknowledged directly? So, after this, and, the administration didn't come out and say thank you to the caseworkers, right? They said thank you to the State Department and Department of Defense, who all deserve all of the thank yous, but that was a public-private partnership that we didn't ask for, right? Like, it was literally something that we did, and they got 130,000 people. And then at the end of Afghanistan, what I was really hoping for was at the State of the Union, they would make some kind of meaningful statement or some kind of general meaningful standalone statement to those people, and we've never heard. So the closure for my war is probably not going to be the same as it is for others. And then meanwhile, with Mass Afghan, the work we're doing here, we're still taking care of these families that have significant problems that came out of that action, right? So I think where I'm at right now with all this is just, I hope things are done different, but in a positive way.
Yep.
Yeah. So we don't know what's coming next. So right now, I know what we have, and this is who we're working with. But we have some hope for the next administration too.
Yep. Agreed. Maybe walk me through, now that you've talked about this, my own experience I've detailed on here several times in interviews, but when the closure came in Afghanistan, and mind you, I never served in Afghanistan, I only trained units up to go, and not everybody came home. So it carries a special place in my heart regardless. Mm-hmm. But when the closure happened, I spun. And I didn't even associate it with the closure. But my wife helped me see about 2 weeks later. She's like, you have been in a funk for 2 weeks. What the heck is happening? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just, maybe it's the TBI. I have no idea. And she's like, do you think it has to do with the closure in Afghanistan? And when she mentioned it, it's like the emotions just came out. Right. And I felt like we had unnecessary deaths because nobody's acknowledging the truth behind it, right? So tell me what you're doing today, John, in this great effort, which is why I connected with you in the beginning, because I was so impressed by the work that you're doing now. Let's tell the audience here what you're up to.
Yeah, so again, I was stationed at the embassy in Afghanistan. I was really fortunate. What a unique place to go anyway.
I'm sure.
It helped me learn a lot of skills, like other skills you're not just necessarily going to learn in the Army, like diplomacy and all these other things. But the biggest thing for me was working with Afghans. So I had Afghan employees, I had Afghan interpreters, and we were in a 2-man office. It was me and a major, and he was an awesome dude too. But anyway, so we worked in Afghanistan. We had a job that we were often not in uniform. We were often in the city alone, just me and the interpreter, or me and a couple other people and the interpreter. So we had really unique, it was fun. It was really interesting to go into Kabul and dress like a contractor and do all this stuff. But it was pretty spicy, and they actually changed the rules for DOD members, but we were on an embassy. So at one point during my tour, this is just kind of an aside story, making me think of it. During one of my tours, they had murdered a bunch of people that was blue on green stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So, and DOD was like, you can't go out alone, made all these rules, and we fell under chief of mission, so we were alone all the time. Like, I don't know, I gotta go do work. But anyway, so I had the opportunity to go out and do fun things, though. I got to meet Afghans, eat the food, talk to Afghans. And then the Afghans, we would eat lunch together because we were friends, and we would break the fast during iftar and do all those things on the embassy. And it was a really unique opportunity. And I really was so endeared to the people of Afghanistan, but my interpreters had given me such a connection to them as a human because they had done so much for me, and especially this guy, Masood. Because we went into some spooky places, and like Masood spoke Pashto and all this stuff. But what I remembered when I left was I was kind of gone. It was 2012, many years ago. I was like, all right, this is it. I'm on my way out. I'm going to go finish up my career in the reserves, which I did. I retired in 2019, and I'd kind of gone on my life. Got my degree while I was in the Army too. Yep. For free, the whole thing. Yep. And I was done. I was done with Afghanistan. Masood comes to the U.S. and so does my friend Najim, and I get a phone call on August 15th. It actually was a message, and it was like, bro, I need your help. My whole family's in Afghanistan. And on August 15th, I woke up and my entire world changed. So I immediately said yes. I didn't think about it. I said, Masood, I got you, and I'm going to figure this out. We're going to work through it, go through the whole thing. And I was really fortunate to work through this event. And we ended up helping about 68 people to come through the airport. Masood's family wasn't even one of them. We failed on the last day right at Abbey Gate. So essentially, yeah, that was kind of the evac. Our group's name was the Evac Fellows. We had some wonderful people on that team. But then what happens, right? Afghans start going to Qatar and Germany and all these places, and they start arriving in Massachusetts and all over the place. But for me, in my former hometown, and some land with great results. They have a team of people and money and stuff. And other Afghans we would find like hoveling in like a crappy hotel, like crappy apartment without very much. And a lot of it is just people are overworked. The agencies are and everything. And so when I saw this problem, I wanted to fix that. And then what I figured out over time is the best way to fix it the most effectively is to support volunteers. So we decided to build Mass Afghan Alliance.
Yeah.
This was a project that I started to support volunteers and Afghan allies in Massachusetts. So we're still pretty new. We just got our 501 about 3 months ago.
Congrats.
But as we went through it, yeah, thank you. We went through, which was a really great program for veterans. Take a look at the Hoover Veteran Fellowship out of Stanford. It is a doer program, and essentially you have to come in with an application that says, I'm going to build something and then have something at the end, but you get the support of like Stanford in this wonderful program. And where we are now is we're fully fledged 501c3, and we operate in the Massachusetts Greater Lowell area. But we do a lot of support for just general refugees now. We understand kind of the landscape's going to change in the next administration, so we got to figure out how to work in that system. So right now we've actually changed our focus to focus more generally on women refugees specifically is kind of where we're going with this. But and that's how Mass Afghan came. It was labor of love. So country collapsed, I bottomed out, my PTSD kicked in, and I became, I tell this part often, but like I literally lived for 2 weeks with no food and just nicotine. Like I'm not even a smoker. Like it was just Zyn packets and phone calls for 2 weeks. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But all that led to this labor of love, Mass Afghan, and now we're real. We're out raising money, and we're helping Afghans. New cases are still coming in, and that's kind of what we're doing.
Are you doing that full time, or is that still like something you're doing on the side with a full-time job?
Yeah, so just outside of kind of this work, so I'm an executive and a partner at a data company, which affords me a lot of opportunity. I work at home, so yeah. I work at home, and I typically just do both things. I do realize if I had a regular 9 to 5, I probably couldn't do that. But right now, Mass Afghan is 100% volunteer. We have our co-founder is an Afghan woman. When we went out, we decided that it was just me at the time. I was like, I'm not. So Afghan women, they come to the United States are amazing. They come to the United States. If they don't have a GED, Afghan girls are like, how do I get a GED? If they have a GED or a high school diploma, how do I go to college? If they have a degree, and every single Afghan woman drives for the result of living a great American life. And so I was going to make sure that Mass Afghan had a really incredible woman. Her name's Farisha Shams, emigrated here in 2019, and just has been a really good addition. But good stuff, though.
Dude, I love that.
I forget what the question was. I forgot the question. I'm sorry.
No, you answered it. Yeah, I absolutely love that. You've targeted a group that's the most exploited group of refugees, and to provide a safe landing for them, and to provide hope and a vision for what's possible. I think that's why we fought the war we fought there, for that exact purpose.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is people can say privilege doesn't exist, but I can tell you as a white veteran, like I get a lot of access to things. I can knock down a lot of doors that a lot of people can't. And how I can help Afghan women is by just like body checking everything in front of them and just being like, oh, you mean the mayor won't answer your call? I'll talk to the mayor. Then they will talk to me because I have, I think we've just been established here, right? And I'm an advocate, and I don't like people being bullied. And a lot of times people won't take Afghans or other refugees seriously because they have an accent and all this other stuff, and they're kind of dismissive. I don't have time for that. Like deployed, we know what these people are capable of, and these families need support. So I think for Mass Afghan, really, my biggest role in the future is going to be just keep kicking. That's what I do. I raise money and I kick down doors. That's really what I'm trying to do for Farishta and everybody else.
Yeah, and if people go back far enough in their family history, 4, 5, 6 generations, we all had accents. We all came from somewhere.
We're all those people once.
Yeah,
we're all
that's right.
People once.
That's right. So they're us, we're them, and of course we got to be united in that cause. I absolutely love that. You know, I took a look at that program you told me to. Application starts in January, I think, for that Hoover program, and yeah, I'm considering it. So
yeah, phenomenal. Just anybody that's looking at it, the amount of resources they give you. It's a remote fellowship too, so you get to fly in. Like what my first plan for Mass Afghan is nothing like I built in the beginning, because they literally put you in the room with the smartest people in the world. Like, so my panel had like General McMaster, an admiral. It had like Barbara Boxer, the former Congress. It was wild. And like, they went through your plans and they gave you feedback and stuff, but you get support like that throughout the whole fellowship. I mean, honestly, it changed my life. It was founded by Condoleezza Rice. She believed that there was a place for veterans to not write papers, right? Because a lot of these fellowships are writing papers and they're real cerebral. And she wanted to show that veterans can do. And that's what we did. So you get accepted on the premise that you're going in and they're going to put you to work for a while.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Yeah. Well, I had a friend recently post on LinkedIn an interview that I had done with her, and it was an amazing interview, and she does some great work on behalf of Afghans and helping to rescue them still today. And after she did that and posted this interview piece about me, I've gotten so many requests for help, and the saddest part is I say it. Look, I help tell stories. And stories have power, and I'm not going to denigrate that. But at the other hand, there are people like you, John, or like her, who are doing the ground level work that are really making an impact and a difference. And maybe I should create a vision of my own to impact this group as well. So.
Well, just being heard is a big part of it, right? So, you know, you don't have much voice with the big government. And so a lot of us, especially the local groups, like the local NGOs, shout out loud constantly. You know, like there's a topic that, and, you know, so being heard, first of all, and being able to speak about it, and people often, when I do these, come back to me and say, oh, I know somebody, and there's a shared experience in all of this. I'll give you an example of cases that are going to be here forever and are going to affect Afghan and other volunteers forever. Actually, reunification cases are cases that we handle. So these are families, and your friend probably knows people like this too, that were, I'll give you an example. One family was separated at Abbey Gate, bomb blows up, dad and son go one way, passports and everything, you know, scattered to the wind. Mom, disabled son, and 2 other daughters go another way, and they've been separated, right? It's been over 3 years now, and they're still not reunited. So one of the things...
Can you imagine?
No, I can't. I actually, you know, the first year when I started meeting them, I was like, hey, I understand how you feel. I left my daughter for a year, although there was no Taliban, you know, trying to kind of relate. I'm right. 3 years out. And so at this point, when I meet with them, because I meet with the families all the time, there's so many families. We've been out there trying to identify them and find them, because the damage isn't just local, right?
Yeah.
We have damage in Afghanistan. We have damage for these families. And some of these dudes are like little 17-year-old kids, and they're just struggling, right? They're just struggling. And it also affects the volunteer community in your town at large, because a lot of these reunification cases show up and they're like, you get 6 months of support. Well, I'm going to tell you, separated cases need a lifetime of support until the family shows up. So those are some of the things I think we're doing that aren't like programmatic, but we're out there like shouting at the government to listen to us and hear. You know, we're doing incredible generational damage to a whole group of people, some who did not deserve it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I hope gets fixed going forward. But for those families that are still there, they reach out to the people they care about. We often get, pictures, less so now, but we used to get a lot of violent imagery. I had to start setting boundaries. I had to learn how to set boundaries. I was never going to be an advocate. That wasn't like my thing. So, it's been a heavy couple of years. I had to tell, I sat with 4 reunification families yesterday, and they all said, is my family going to get out before January 20th? Whether it's a perceived deadline or not, Afghans are worried about the January 20th deadline. And it's because changes in refugee stuff changes everybody.
Yep.
And a lot of them are like, is my family going to be safe? And knowing where and so I can't tell them this.
Yeah.
Their family probably not going to make it up. And I know where they are in the kind of in the queue. And, I'm like, it's not bad news. This is what we are doing. Da, 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 da. And then the teenage kid starts crying and like has to leave. So these scars from Afghanistan will last generations. And they're really local and meaningful. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. And every name is a person, is a story, is real.
Yeah.
And that makes it hard, but for those who are advocates like yourself, John, and my friend Anna Lloyd and Beth and other people, that's incredible. That's incredible.
There's going to be a whole community out here. Every Saturday during the spring and summer, they play up in Lowell, the bigger city. They play cricket. They play cricket and they hang out and it's great. It's super fun. Yeah. Yeah, I show up at all the Afghan. I'm like the random white guy that runs around yelling single words in Dari. Like I'm like cringe and so I look like because I say the same 12 words over and over again. But it's it's so much fun, and they think it's funny. So I just whatever.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Well, John, I appreciate you coming on today and sharing these stories. They've brightened my heart. They've also reminded me of so much work that has yet to be done. And that there's even more work that I can do on my own and figure things out. But I appreciate the recommendation to Stanford and looking into that program. If I can come up with a viable project that I think adds greater value at the ground level, maybe I will. In the last couple of minutes here, John, can you give some advice to anybody that is listening today who's global and who's struggling without resources?
Yeah, you know what it is? I would say this. What I've always done is kept faith in people, right? So look for the helpers type stuff, right? So figure out the people in your life that are willing to help. And, I know this is kind of a tough view, but one of the things I learned in the military is if somebody's not reliable or useful, to just move on, right? So if you're out here and people are reaching out to you or you need help, there's a whole community. If you're an evac person, there's a whole community around that. There are people out here. That's my biggest thing. Just understand that whatever your advocacy is, there are more people doing it and you're not alone. Often, even now, sometimes I really get really sour and just like, I'm just rolling the boulder uphill like Sisyphus, right?
Yep.
Just rolling the boulder. But I can tell you with some kind of authority that if you roll the boulder up the hill enough times, a family lands in your community, or whatever it is your advocacy is, or a family's house is furnished, or whatever it is your goal is. It's just keep rolling the boulder, man. Just roll and roll and roll.
I love that. Roll the boulder.
I actually named my initial code name project name for this was Task Force Sisyphus. So,
really?
Yeah.
Great imagery.
Yeah, because all this work, everything just requires hard work. For me, it requires hard work and dedication. The other part of that, though, is I will say, while you're doing the hard work, take some breaks and like find people you trust and that feel safe to you that you can talk to, because advocacy work and all this work can be really lonely. And like if you don't have the right people around you, you're just like the military, right? You got your buddies around you. Either you do or you don't. And I prefer people do, because I care a lot about the people that do this work.
Yeah. John, thanks again so much. Thanks for what you're doing. And you have a friend in me, my friend, so don't be a stranger in the future. But thank you very much for the advocacy that you're doing right now and helping people, because that's the purpose of this channel too, is to reach people and communicate those stories so that people can identify with them and know that they have brothers and sisters globally. So, all right, my friend, Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.